In the sleepy town of Ravenwood, there was an old mansion on the outskirts that had been abandoned for decades. Locals whispered about its haunted history, but few knew the full story. One foggy evening, a group of teenagers decided to explore the mansion, hoping to debunk the ghost stories or perhaps to find something thrilling. Among them were Sarah, her brother Mark, and their friends Emma and Jake. Armed with flashlights and a sense of adventure, they approached the creaky gates and pushed their way inside. The mansion's interior was a relic of a bygone era. Dusty chandeliers hung precariously from the ceiling, and faded portraits stared down from the walls. As they wandered deeper into the house, they found themselves in a grand library filled with old books and cobwebs. "Look at this," Mark said, pointing to a book on entomology. "Someone was really into bugs." Sarah shuddered. She had always hated insects, but something compelled her to open the book. As she did, a piece of paper fluttered to the ground. She picked it up and read aloud, "The key to the secret lies beneath the floorboards." Excited by the prospect of a hidden treasure, the group pried open the floorboards and discovered a hidden staircase leading down into darkness. With their flashlights guiding the way, they descended into what appeared to be an old laboratory. The air was thick with the smell of chemicals and decay. Glass containers lined the shelves, filled with strange, preserved specimens. In the center of the room was a large glass tank covered with a heavy cloth. Emma, ever curious, pulled the cloth away to reveal a writhing mass of insects. "Gross!" she exclaimed, jumping back. Mark leaned in closer. "These aren't just any insects. They look different." Indeed, the creatures in the tank were unlike anything they had seen before. They were a mix of beetles, spiders, and other unidentifiable arthropods, all seemingly fused together in a grotesque manner. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. As they continued to explore, they found an old journal. Jake opened it and began to read. It detailed the experiments of Dr. Victor Crawley, a scientist obsessed with creating a new species of insects. According to the journal, Crawley's experiments had gone horribly wrong, leading to his disappearance. Unbeknownst to the teenagers, their presence had disturbed the balance of the laboratory. As they read from the journal, the insects in the tank began to stir more violently. Suddenly, the glass tank shattered, and the creatures spilled out onto the floor. "Run!" Sarah screamed, but it was too late. The insects swarmed over them, their bites injecting a paralyzing venom. One by one, they fell to the ground, unable to move. The insects seemed to communicate with each other, forming a path towards the exit. As Sarah lay there, helpless, she realized that these creatures were more intelligent than they appeared. They had a purpose, and it was far from benign. Hours later, Sarah awoke to find herself alone. The paralysis had worn off, but her friends were nowhere to be seen. Panic set in as she searched the laboratory and the rest of the mansion, but there was no sign of them. As she made her way back to the entrance, she noticed something strange. The insects were now everywhere, not just in the laboratory. They moved with a coordinated effort, spreading throughout the mansion and beyond. Sarah knew she had to get help. She raced back to town, but when she tried to explain what had happened, no one believed her. Desperate, she turned to the town's historian, Mr. Thompson, hoping he might have some information about Dr. Crawley. Mr. Thompson was a frail old man with a wealth of knowledge about Ravenwood's history. When Sarah mentioned Dr. Crawley, his eyes widened with recognition. Dr. Crawley was a brilliant but troubled man, Thompson explained. He believed he could create a new species of insects that could revolutionize agriculture, but his experiments were dangerous, and many believed he had gone mad. Sarah showed him the journal she had found, and Thompson's face grew pale as he read it. "This is worse than I thought. If these creatures are as intelligent as you say, they could pose a serious threat." Together, they devised a plan to stop the insects. They gathered supplies and enlisted the help of a few trusted townspeople. Armed with insecticides and protective gear, They made their way back to the mansion. As they approached the mansion, they could see the insects swarming around it, their numbers growing by the minute. Sarah led the group to the hidden staircase, and they descended into the laboratory once more. This time, they were prepared. Using the information from the journal, they targeted the nest where the insects seemed to be originating. It was a gruesome sight, a massive pulsating mass of insect larvae and eggs. With flamethrowers and insecticides, they attacked the nest, destroying it piece by piece. The insects fought back fiercely, but they were no match for the determined townspeople. After hours of fighting, the last of the insects were finally destroyed. The mansion was left in ruins, but the town of Ravenwood was safe once more. Sarah and Mr. Thompson stood outside, watching as the sun began to rise. "We did it," Sarah said, her voice filled with relief. "But at what cost?" Thompson replied. "Dr. Crawley's legacy will haunt this town for years to come." As they walked back to town, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching them. She glanced back at the mansion one last time and saw a single insect crawling out of the rubble. It paused, as if acknowledging her, before disappearing into the shadows. Months passed, and life in Ravenwood returned to normal. But Sarah knew that the events of that night would stay with her forever. She spent hours researching insects, hoping to find a way to prevent such a horror from ever happening again. One evening, as she was working in her room, she heard a faint buzzing sound. She turned to see a small, glowing insect on her windowsill. It was one of Crawley's creations. Instead of fear, she felt a strange sense of curiosity. She watched as it flew away, disappearing into the night. Sarah realized that the battle was far from over. The creepy crawlers were out there, somewhere, waiting for the right moment to return, and when they did, she would be ready.